A humble black woman, dressed so modestly she could have been part of the waitstaff, stepped onto the stage at the lavish wedding. The spotlight found her, and she clutched a simple microphone, her eyes scanning the sea of expectant faces. The bride, a vision in white lace and simmering fury, watched from the head table, her perfectly painted lips twisted into a snarl. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. In front of hundreds of stunned guests, the bride's voice, sharp and ugly, sliced through the air. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You don't belong here!" A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The music died. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. But what nobody in that room knew, what that arrogant bride couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman she was trying to throw out wasn't just some uninvited singer. She was a millionaire songwriter. She was the hidden genius behind the very love song the couple had chosen for their first dance. By the end of this night, the bride would be humiliated. Jaws would hang open in disbelief, and a quiet truth would shake this entire wedding to its very core. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The ballroom was a palace of light and sound. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the 300 guests. The air smelled of expensive perfume, lilies, and champagne. Laughter echoed off the high, ornate walls, a symphony of celebration. At the head table, Lindsay Carter, the bride, radiated a kind of fierce, possessive joy. Her wedding was perfect. Every flower, every place setting, every guest had been curated to project an image of wealth, status, and flawless taste. She was the queen of this kingdom, and her groom, Jason Miller, was her handsome king. Then the band leader stepped to his microphone. "And now," he announced, his voice smooth and practiced, "for a very special performance, arranged as a surprise for the happy couple." A soft spotlight bloomed on a small secondary stage near the band. A woman walked into its beam. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress, the kind of outfit that was designed not to draw attention. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she held a microphone in her hand. This was Danielle Brooks. Lindsay's smile vanished. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a knot of confusion, which quickly curdled into raw fury. Who was this? This wasn't on her schedule. Her schedule was a work of art, a minute-by-minute blueprint for perfection. This woman was an anomaly, an unwelcome variable. And worse, she was a black woman, dressed like a member of the catering staff who had foolishly wandered onto the stage. Lindsay's mind, conditioned by a lifetime of privilege and prejudice, didn't see a performer. It saw an intruder. She stood up. The scraping of her chair was a shriek of protest in the otherwise joyful room. She didn't walk. She stormed. Her movements were sharp, angry, her expensive gown swishing like a furious tide behind her. Guests turned, their smiles fading, replaced by looks of confusion. The laughter died down, replaced by a low, uncertain murmur. Jason, her new husband, started to rise, a questioning look on his face. "Lindsay, what's wrong?" he began, but she was already gone, a blur of white silk and rage. She reached the edge of the dance floor, just a few feet from the stage where Danielle stood waiting patiently. Danielle had seen the bride approaching, had seen the storm clouds gathering in her eyes. But she remained perfectly still, her posture calm, her expression neutral. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. Lindsay's voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a weapon. "Who are you?" she spat, the words dripping with contempt. The entire ballroom fell silent. The clinking of forks stopped. The band froze. Instruments held midair. Every eye in the room was now fixed on the bride and the woman on the stage. "You don't belong here." Lindsay's voice rose, becoming a full-blown shout that bounced off the crystal chandeliers. "Get out!" A wave of shock rolled through the crowd. Jaws literally dropped. An elderly woman in the front row put a hand to her chest, her face pale. A man choked on his champagne, sputtering into his napkin. This wasn't just a bride having a moment. This was a public demolition. This was cruelty, raw and unfiltered, on display for everyone to see. Lindsay wasn't finished. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at Danielle. Her face was flushed, a blotchy red creeping up her neck. "I don't know who you think you are," she sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "Some random black girl sneaking in to ruin my day, trying to get a free meal." "Security!" she shrieked, turning her head towards the entrance. "Security! Get her out of my wedding!" Danielle stood under the spotlight, a lone figure in a sea of judgment and shock. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was a shield, a quiet, powerful force that seemed to absorb all of Lindsay's venom. She held the microphone loosely at her side, her eyes meeting Lindsay's across the space. There was no fear in her gaze. There was no anger. There was only a profound, unshakable calm. It was the calm of someone who knew a truth that no one else in the room could yet comprehend. The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. The perfect wedding had just shattered, and the pieces were still falling. Jason Miller felt as if he were encased in ice. The world had slowed down, the sounds of the ballroom becoming muffled and distant, like hearing a party from underwater. He watched his wife, his new wife of only a few hours, transform into a stranger. The woman he loved, or thought he loved, was standing in the middle of their wedding reception, screaming at a guest. And not just any guest. His feet felt bolted to the floor. One part of his brain, the part that had been trained in the military to react decisively under fire, was screaming at him to move, to intervene, to do something, protect, defend. But another part of him, a newer, more hesitant part conditioned by his relationship with Lindsay, was frozen by the sheer force of her rage. He had seen her temper before, but it was always in private, small storms that quickly passed. This was a hurricane. To stand against it felt impossible. He saw the faces of his parents, their smiles replaced with masks of horror and embarrassment. He saw Lindsay's father, a man who prided himself on control and public image, looking at his daughter with a mixture of shock and fury. The guests were no longer celebrating. They were whispering, their heads bent together like conspirators. He could feel their judgment, 100 pairs of eyes dissecting his failure to control his own wife. "Lindsay, stop," he finally managed to say, but his voice was a weak croak, swallowed by the cavernous silence she had created. She didn't even hear him. Her focus was entirely on Danielle, her body rigid with a sense of righteous victory. The band leader, a seasoned professional who had seen his share of wedding drama, slowly lowered his baton. The musicians exchanged uneasy glances. The drummer set his sticks down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense quiet. The music was officially dead. From the side of the room, near a service station laden with polished silverware, a young waitress named Emily Torres watched the scene unfold. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She was only 21, working 2 jobs to pay for college, and she had been taught to be invisible at these events. Serve the food, clear the plates, never make eye contact with the wealthy guests. But this was different. This wasn't a spilled drink or a forgotten appetizer. This was a public humiliation, and it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. Her stomach churned with a sick mixture of fear and anger. Lindsay, feeling the power of the silence she commanded, doubled down. "I said remove this woman immediately," she yelled towards the 2 burly security guards, who were now moving hesitantly from the ballroom entrance. They looked uncomfortable, their professional composure rattled. They were paid to remove drunk uncles and wedding crashers, not to be the enforcers of a bride's prejudiced tantrum. Danielle saw them coming. With a slow, deliberate movement, she lowered the microphone and placed it carefully on the stand. Her face remained a mask of calm, but her eyes, those quiet, powerful eyes, held a strength that seemed to radiate from her. She didn't fight. She didn't argue. She didn't protest her innocence. She simply allowed the moment to happen, to play out exactly as the cruel bride intended. It was a strategic retreat, a temporary surrender in a war that Lindsay didn't even know had been declared. Danielle understood something that Lindsay, in her arrogant rage, could not. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let your enemy reveal their true character to the world. And Lindsay had just done so, in spectacular fashion. The Groom's silence was the gasoline on the fire she had started. To understand the woman on the stage, you had to leave the glittering ballroom and travel to a different world entirely. You had to go to a state-of-the-art recording studio in the heart of the city, a sanctuary of soundproofed walls, gleaming mixing boards, and platinum records that lined the corridors like wallpaper. This was Danielle Brooks's real world. Here she wasn't a random black girl. She was a titan. Danielle was a songwriter, but that was like saying a king is just a man who wears a crown. She was the ghostwriter behind some of the biggest pop, R&B, and country hits of the last decade. Artists begged for her work. Labels paid her millions for a single melody, a single turn of phrase. She had a gift for capturing human emotion, heartbreak, joy, longing, and distilling it into 3.5 minutes of musical perfection. She had founded her own record label and publishing company, turning her talent into a formidable empire. She was a millionaire many times over, a quiet giant in an industry built on noise. But she hated the spotlight, the fame, the red carpets, the endless interviews. It all felt like a distraction from the work, from the music itself. She preferred the quiet solitude of her studio, the magic of a late-night session when a melody would finally click into place. She let other, more flamboyant artists be the face of her songs. She was the architect. They were the beautiful facade. Most people who sang along to her music on the radio had no idea who she was, and that was exactly how she liked it. So what was she doing at this wedding, dressed in a simple dress, about to be thrown out like a trespasser? The answer was a friendship forged in hardship. It had started with an email 3 years ago. The sender was a soldier named Jason Miller, recently returned from a brutal tour of duty overseas. He wrote to her not as a fan, but as a survivor. He told her about the loneliness, the fear, the struggle to reconnect with a world that no longer made sense to him. He said that during his darkest moments, there was one song that had kept him going, a song about holding on to hope, about believing in a love you couldn't yet see. It was a deep cut from an album she had written for a folk singer, not one of her massive pop hits. But for Jason, it had been a lifeline. The song was called The Harbor, and Danielle had written every word, every note. She had written back to him. An email turned into a correspondence into phone calls. She was moved by his vulnerability, his honesty. He wasn't starstruck. He was just a good man trying to find his way back. He didn't know the extent of her success, and she never told him. She was just Danny, the woman who wrote the song that saved him. They became friends, a strange and unlikely pair, the quiet music mogul and the earnest soldier. He was like the brother she never had. When he told her he was getting married to a woman named Lindsay, she was happy for him. Then came the request. Danny, he had written, his words full of hesitant hope. I know this is a huge ask, and I know you don't perform publicly. But our song, The Harbor, it's the song that brought me back to life. It's the song that made me believe I could love someone like Lindsay. It would mean the world to me, to us, if you would sing it at our wedding. Just that one song. It would be my gift to her. Her first instinct was to say no. It went against everything she stood for, the anonymity, the quiet life. But this wasn't about fame. This was about Jason. It was about honoring the journey of a friend who had found his harbor. She agreed on one condition. She would do it anonymously. No grand introduction, no mention of her name. She would just be a singer, a surprise for the bride. She would come, sing the song that meant so much to him, and slip away. It was a gift, given from the heart. So she had dressed modestly. She had arrived quietly, coordinating with the band leader, but no one else. She had waited for her cue, ready to give her friend the most meaningful gift she could imagine. She never expected this. She never expected the bride, the woman her friend loved, to look at her with such undisguised hatred. She never expected to be publicly humiliated, to be called an intruder at the very event where she was the guest of honor, the secret beating heart of the groom's love story. Danielle's decision to be at that wedding wasn't driven by ego or a need for recognition. It was an act of profound friendship. It was about honoring a promise made to a man who had bared his soul to her. She remembered their conversations vividly. Jason had spoken of the desert, of the endless sand and the suffocating heat both outside and within him. He described the feeling of being hollowed out, of returning home a stranger in his own skin. "Your song," he had told her once over a crackling phone line, his voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't just lyrics and a melody. It was a place, a safe place. When everything was noise and chaos, I could close my eyes and I was there, in that harbor you wrote about. It gave me a picture of what I was fighting to come home to, even before I met Lindsay." For Danielle, who often felt detached from the real-world impact of her work, Jason's story was a powerful reminder of why she created music in the first place. Her songs weren't just products to be sold. They were vessels of emotion, capable of reaching across the world and touching a soul in desperate need of hope. Her bond with Jason was pure, built on a foundation of shared vulnerability and mutual respect. He saw her not as a hit maker, but as a healer. And she saw him not as a fan, but as a testament to the power of her art. When she agreed to sing at his wedding, she saw it as the final chapter in that part of his story. She would be there to personally deliver the song that had been his anchor, and in doing so pass the torch to Lindsay, the woman who was now his real-life harbor. She had imagined the moment with a quiet sense of satisfaction, the look on Jason's face, the surprise and joy on his bride's. She imagined a moment of pure, unadulterated love, underscored by the music she had created. But Lindsay saw none of this. Lindsay's world was not one of emotional depth or secret histories. It was a world of surfaces, of appearances. She judged people based on a brutal and superficial calculus: what they wore, what they drove, who they knew. In Lindsay's eyes, a person's worth was determined by their proximity to power and wealth, a status that had to be loudly and constantly displayed. When she saw Danielle, a black woman she didn't recognize, dressed in a simple, unbranded dress, her mind processed the information through a filter of ingrained prejudice. She didn't see a person, she saw a category. In her meticulously planned, all-white, high society wedding, Danielle was a glaring error. She was out of place. She didn't fit the aesthetic. Her presence was a threat to the perfect image Lindsay had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to create. The rage that erupted from her wasn't just about an unscheduled performance. It was about a perceived invasion of her carefully constructed world by someone she deemed unworthy to even be in the same room. The very idea that this woman might be important, might have a reason to be there, never even crossed her mind. Arrogance had blinded her to all other possibilities. And so the gift Danielle had come to give was not just rejected. It was trampled underfoot by the very person it was meant to honor. Back in the chaos of the ballroom, Emily Torres felt a hot surge of adrenaline. Her hands, usually steady as she balanced trays of champagne flutes, were trembling. What she had just witnessed felt like a crime. The bride's words echoed in her head. "You don't belong here." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She looked at Danielle, standing on that stage with such impossible dignity. and then at Lindsay, her face a mask of smug entitlement. The injustice of it all lit a fire in her chest. Her manager's voice was a constant refrain in her training. Stay out of it. You are furniture that moves. Your job is to be invisible. Getting involved could get her fired, and she needed this job. Her tuition payment was due next week. But then she looked at the faces in the crowd. She saw the shock, the discomfort. But she also saw something else. Inaction. People were whispering, shaking their heads, but no one was stepping forward. No one was challenging the queen in her castle. They were all guests bound by a social contract of politeness, even in the face of blatant cruelty. A decision clicked into place in her mind. It was swift and certain. She wouldn't be a bystander. She wouldn't let this moment be erased or rewritten later as a simple misunderstanding. The truth needed a witness. With movements made subtle by years of practice weaving through crowded rooms, she slipped behind a large floral arrangement. Her fingers fumbled in her apron pocket, closing around her phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She felt like a spy, a dissident in a gilded dictatorship. She pulled out the phone, her thumb quickly tapping the screen to open the camera app. She shielded the screen with her body, angling it just enough to capture the scene. She hit record. The small red light was a tiny beacon of rebellion. She only caught a few seconds of the aftermath, but it was the most important part. She captured Lindsay, her voice still raised, gesturing dismissively towards Danielle as she repeated her demand for security. She caught the bride's sneering expression, the ugly twist of her mouth. It wasn't the full tirade, but it was enough. It was proof. It was undeniable. Just as the security guards began to walk towards the stage, Danielle's eyes briefly met Emily's across the room. It was a fleeting glance, but in that moment Emily felt a powerful connection. She saw a flicker of acknowledgement, of gratitude. It was as if Danielle knew, as if she could sense the small act of solidarity taking place in the shadows. Emily quickly stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Her hands were still shaking. But now it wasn't from fear. It was from a sense of purpose. She didn't know who this woman on the stage was, or why she was here. All she knew was that she had been wronged, and that the truth of that wrong was now saved. A tiny digital bomb waiting for the right moment to detonate. If things got worse, if people tried to deny what had happened, she would have a voice. She would not let this injustice be buried under a mountain of expensive flowers and polite silence. Having successfully ejected the intruder, Lindsay swept back to the head table, her face flushed with the thrill of victory. She felt powerful, decisive. She had protected the sanctity of her day. She collapsed into her chair, a triumphant general returning from a swift and successful battle. Her bridesmaids, a flock of women in matching silk dresses, immediately swarmed around her, their faces a mixture of feigned concern and gleeful excitement. "Lindsay, are you okay?" "That was insane," one of them gushed. Lindsay waved a dismissive hand, a smirk playing on her lips. She took a large gulp of champagne. "I'm fine," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Can you believe the nerve of some people? Just walking in here thinking she could get on stage." She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a loud, carrying whisper. "Did you see her face? When I called her out? She just stood there like a deer in headlights. She thought she was someone important." A chorus of forced, high-pitched laughter erupted from her bridesmaids. They mirrored her contempt, their loyalty absolute. "Seriously," another one chimed in, eager to add to the narrative. "What was she even wearing?" She looked like one of the hotel maids who got lost. The insult landed exactly as intended. More laughter. Lindsay preened, basking in the attention. The public humiliation of another person had become a source of entertainment, a bonding moment for her and her inner circle. Her prejudice, which usually hid behind a thin veneer of social grace, was now on full display, spilling out in a torrent of ugly, condescending remarks. "I bet she was hoping to get a fat tip for singing some sob story song," Lindsay continued, her imagination running wild with demeaning scenarios. Or maybe she thought she could scam us for a free dinner. The entitlement is just unbelievable. She scanned the room, her eyes daring anyone to challenge her. Most guests avoided her gaze, focusing intently on their plates of food. But Lindsay didn't interpret their silence as disapproval. She saw it as confirmation of her power. She had restored order. She had removed the blemish from her perfect day. In her mind, she was the hero of the story. Jason, sitting beside her, felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He listened to her gloating, to the cruel jokes and the sycophantic laughter of her friends, and he felt a growing sense of alienation. This was not the woman he thought he knew. The Lindsay he had fallen in love with was ambitious and driven, yes, but he had never seen this strain of pure, unadulterated cruelty. Or maybe, he thought with a sickening lurch, he had just chosen not to see it. "Lindsay, maybe we should just drop it," he said quietly, trying to de-escalate the situation. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Drop it? Jason, she tried to ruin our wedding. I did what I had to do. You should be thanking me." She patted his hand in a patronizing gesture, as if comforting a naive child. "Don't worry. It's over now. Everything is back to being perfect." But it wasn't perfect. Far from it. As Lindsay continued to brag and mock, a poison was spreading through the room. The joyous atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. And at the center of it all sat the bride, utterly oblivious, celebrating a victory that would soon cost her everything. The rest of the dinner service was an exercise in strained politeness. Jason picked at his food, the expensive meal tasting like ash in his mouth. Lindsay's words replayed in his head, each one a small shard of ice in his gut. "Random black girl. Looks like a maid." He felt a wave of shame so profound it was nauseating. He remembered Danielle's quiet kindness during their phone calls. He remembered the wisdom in her words, the way she had listened to his darkest fears without judgment. She was a friend, a good one. And he had sat there, frozen, while his wife publicly and viciously attacked her. Why had he done nothing? The question gnawed at him, a relentless accusation. Was he afraid of Lindsay, of her anger, of ruining their perfect day? The answer was a shameful yes, and that realization made him feel small and weak. The whispers in the ballroom were now a constant, low hum. He could feel the eyes of his family on him, the disappointment radiating from his parents' table. He caught the eye of his best man, who gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and confusion. The wedding, his wedding, was starting to feel like a disaster scene. The beautiful facade had cracked, and something ugly was seeping through. He tried to talk to Lindsay again, leaning over to her as a waiter cleared their plates. "Lindsay, we need to talk about what happened. That woman. She's a friend of mine." Lindsay rolled her eyes, her patience clearly gone. "A friend? Jason, please. I've met all your friends. I've never seen her before in my life. You don't have friends who look like that." She said the word "that" with a dismissive flick of her wrist, as if Danielle was not a person but an object of poor taste. "Her name is Danielle," he insisted, his voice low and urgent. "She's the one she wrote the song. Our song." Lindsay stared at him, her expression blank for a moment, and then she let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, Jason, you're so naive. You can't possibly believe that. She was probably just some scam artist who read our wedding website and made up a story to get in. You need to be less trusting." His words had hit a wall of pure, unshakable arrogance. She had already constructed her reality, and there was no room in it for a truth that contradicted her actions. She turned away from him, engaging her maid of honor in a loud conversation about the honeymoon. The discussion was closed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ballroom, Danielle Brooks was not gone. She hadn't fled in shame or anger. She had simply retreated to a quiet alcove near the service exit, a place of calm amidst the storm she had patiently weathered. She held her phone to her ear, her voice a model of composure. She was not the victim Lindsay had tried to make her. She was a CEO, and she was about to conduct business. The guests, distracted by the drama at the head table, were completely unaware of the quiet power play that was now in motion. They saw only the aftermath of the bride's tantrum. They saw the groom's unease, but they did not see the hidden giant in the corner, calmly and methodically preparing to change the entire game. In the quiet alcove, hidden from the prying eyes of the wedding guests, Danielle made a series of phone calls. Her demeanor was the complete opposite of Lindsay's hysterical outburst. She was calm, focused, and precise. Her voice never rose above a measured professional tone. She was a commander moving her pieces into position on a chessboard. Her first call was to her agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria. "Maria, it's Danielle," she said, her voice low. "I'm at that wedding I told you about. There's been an incident." She quickly and factually recounted the events, leaving out any trace of personal emotion. She described Lindsay's words and actions as if she were reading a legal deposition. Maria's response on the other end of the line was a string of furious, muffled curses. "Are you serious? That little—" "Danielle, I'm sending a car. Get out of there. We'll sue them for defamation for—" "No," Danielle interrupted, her tone firm but gentle. "Don't send a car. I'm not leaving yet, but I do need you to do something for me. I need you to contact my lawyer, Kenji. I need you both on a conference call in 5 minutes. Also, get me the head of licensing from the label. I need him too." There was a pause. Maria understood immediately. This wasn't about running away. This was about control. "Okay, Danny. 5 minutes." The next call brought together her core team, her agent, her lawyer, and the head of her record label. Danielle laid out the situation and her plan with chilling clarity. "The song they chose for their first dance is The Harbor," she explained. "The performance license was granted as a personal favor, a gift to the groom, Jason Miller. There was no formal contract for my performance, but the standard usage license for the recording is in place with the DJ." "Was," her lawyer Kenji corrected her. His voice was sharp. "Past tense." "Exactly," Danielle agreed. "As of this moment, I am revoking all permissions. The gift is rescinded. I want you to freeze the license for the master recording effective immediately. I don't want that song played in this venue tonight or by this couple ever again. Can you do that?" The head of the label didn't hesitate. "Consider it done. I'll make the call to our legal department right now. The DJ's provider will get a digital revocation notice within the next 20 minutes. If he tries to play that track, it'll be flagged for copyright infringement. It might even be digitally locked." "Good," Danielle said. "Now, Kenji, I need you to draw up a cease and desist letter. Standard language, unauthorized use of intellectual property. I also want you to pull up the original copyright documentation for The Harbor, the master ownership, the publishing rights, everything. I want it all on your tablet, ready to display." "What are you planning, Danny?" Maria asked, a note of awe in her voice. "The bride, Lindsay, believes she has all the power in that room," Danielle said, a hint of steel entering her voice for the first time. "She believes she can humiliate someone based on their appearance and face no consequences. She's about to learn that true power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about owning the very thing your enemy desires most. They want my song for their perfect moment. Fine. But they'll have to go through me to get it, and I'm no longer in a giving mood." She gave them their final instructions. Kenji and the label representative were to come to the venue immediately. They were to dress in their most formidable business attire. They were to bring the paperwork, and they were to wait for her signal. The plan was set. The trap was laid. All she had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to spring it. As the dinner plates were cleared, an uneasy quiet settled over the ballroom. The joyous energy from earlier in the evening was completely gone, replaced by a thick, simmering tension. Guests spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flicking towards the head table where Lindsay sat, oblivious and radiant. She laughed loudly at a joke, the sound jarring in the subdued atmosphere. She was the only person in the room who didn't seem to feel the storm that was brewing. Emily, the waitress, moved through the tables with quiet efficiency, her mind racing. Every time she passed the alcove where Danielle had been making her calls, she felt a pang of solidarity. On one of her trips to clear glasses, she saw Danielle step out from the shadows. Danielle gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Emboldened, Emily changed her path slightly, passing closer to Danielle. "Are you okay?" Emily whispered, barely moving her lips, her eyes fixed straight ahead as if she were just walking by. "I will be," Danielle replied, her voice just as quiet. "Thank you for what you did." Foreseeing Emily felt a flush of pride. "Everyone saw what she did," she whispered back. "People are stunned." It was wrong. "I know," Danielle said. "Just stay quiet for now. It's not over." Emily nodded and moved on, her heart beating a little faster. She felt like she was now part of a secret resistance, a quiet ally in a battle for dignity. She watched Lindsay more closely now, and what she saw was a woman completely detached from the reality of the room. Lindsay was making snide remarks to her bridesmaids, pointing out a guest's dress she deemed tacky, complaining that the champagne wasn't as cold as it should be. Her arrogance was a fortress, impenetrable to the waves of disapproval washing over the room. Jason, on the other hand, looked like a prisoner. He noticed the shift in energy acutely. He saw how guests would fall silent when he approached their tables. He saw the polite but distant smiles that didn't reach their eyes. He was the groom, the host of this celebration. But he felt like a pariah. His big day, the day that was supposed to be the happiest of his life, felt poisoned. The foundation of his marriage was already cracking, and it was barely 6 hours old. He felt a desperate need to find Danielle, to apologize, to explain, but he didn't know where she had gone, and he was still trapped at the head table, chained by ceremony to the woman who had caused all this damage. The band, unsure of what to do, began playing soft, generic jazz music. It was background noise, a weak attempt to fill the awkward silence. The room was waiting. It was a calm, tense, expectant quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a lightning strike. Lindsay, lost in her own self-congratulatory world, didn't notice a thing. She thought the night was proceeding according to her perfect plan. She had no idea that her plan was no longer the one in motion. The real power in the room had consolidated in a quiet corner, and it was about to make its move. Finally, the moment arrived. The wedding planner, a woman with a perpetually strained smile and a clipboard clutched in her hand, tapped the microphone on the main stage. Her voice was artificially bright, a desperate attempt to inject some life back into the dying party. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," she chirped. "It is now time for a very special moment. A moment we've all been waiting for. Will you please clear the dance floor and welcome the new Mr. and Mrs. Miller for their first dance as husband and wife?" A smattering of polite, half-hearted applause rippled through the room. Lindsay's face lit up. This was her moment, the centerpiece of the evening. She stood up, pulling a reluctant Jason to his feet. She shot him a triumphant smirk as if to say, "See? Everything is fine. I fixed it." She had completely forgotten, or perhaps willfully ignored, Jason's earlier claim that the intruder had written their song. In her mind, that was just a silly, sentimental story he had been told. She led him to the center of the vast, empty dance floor. The house lights dimmed, and a single soft spotlight enveloped them. Lindsay closed her eyes for a moment, a blissful smile on her face, ready to be the star of her own romantic movie. She rested her head on Jason's shoulder, a picture of bridal perfection. The DJ, cued by the planner, pressed a button on his console. The opening notes of The Harbor filled the ballroom. It was a beautiful, haunting melody, played on a simple acoustic guitar. It spoke of hope, of finding peace after a long and arduous journey. For the briefest of seconds, the magic returned. Jason felt a lump form in his throat. This was the song, Danielle's song, the song that had saved him. And then, it stopped. The music cut out with an abrupt, jarring silence. It wasn't a fade out. It was a hard stop, like a plug being pulled from a wall. The guests, who had been watching with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, let out a collective gasp. Lindsay's eyes flew open, her blissful expression instantly replaced with annoyance. "What's going on?" she hissed at Jason. The DJ was frantically tapping at his screen, his face a mask of confusion and panic. He looked up at the wedding planner, shrugging his shoulders helplessly. Then a new voice came over the PA system. It wasn't the DJs or the planners. It was a cold, official, disembodied voice, the kind you hear in an airport or a government building. "We have a notification from the copyright holder," the voice announced, clear and emotionless. "The license for this musical composition, The Harbor, has been revoked. The owner requests silence. The track is no longer authorized for public performance. Silence." Then a wave of murmurs and whispers erupted, louder this time. "Revoked? The owner? What does that mean?" Lindsay stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her face turning from annoyance to disbelief. She looked around the room, searching for someone to blame. Her eyes landed on the flustered DJ. "Play the song!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I paid for the song! Play it!" The DJ held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I can't," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's locked. My system literally won't let me play it. I've never seen anything like this confusion turn to chaos." The wedding planner was rushing towards the DJ booth. Lindsay's father was on his feet, his face red with anger. The perfect moment. The moment Lindsay had been waiting for her entire life had just been stolen from her, and she had no idea who the thief was or why this was happening. The spotlight that was meant to illuminate her fairy tale dance now felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing her and her fury to a room full of shocked and bewildered witnesses. Just as the chaos in the ballroom reached its peak, the grand double doors at the entrance swung open. But it wasn't a hotel manager or a security guard who entered. It was Danielle Brooks. She was no longer the modest, unassuming woman who had been screamed off the stage. She walked with a quiet, unshakable confidence that seemed to command the attention of the entire room. She still wore the same simple dress, but now it seemed less like a humble garment and more like a symbol of her understated power. She wasn't trying to impress anyone with her appearance, because she didn't have to. And she was not alone. Flanking her on either side were two figures who looked as though they had stepped directly out of a high-stakes corporate boardroom. On her right was Kenji, her lawyer, a sharp, impeccably dressed man with an expression that could cut glass. On her left was the head of her record label, a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit. They moved with a synchronized purpose, their faces grim and professional. Kenji carried a sleek leather briefcase. The label head held a tablet. They didn't rush. They walked at a steady, deliberate pace across the ballroom, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A path seemed to clear for them as they approached. The whispering guests fell silent, their heads turning to follow the procession. It was as if royalty, or perhaps a hanging judge, had just entered the court. The entire atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. The balance of power, which had been so firmly in Lindsay's hands just an hour ago, had just tilted, decisively and irrevocably. They didn't stop at the edge of the room. They walked directly towards the head table, the epicenter of the wedding. They stopped in front of it, a formidable trio facing the bride's now empty chair. Kenji placed his briefcase on the pristine white tablecloth with a soft, definitive thud. He clicked it open. Lindsay, who was still standing shell-shocked on the dance floor, watched this unfold with a dawning sense of horror. Her face, which had been red with anger, was now draining of all color. She finally looked at Danielle, truly looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of fear entered her eyes. The woman she had dismissed as a nobody, as a maid, was now standing at the head of her wedding reception, flanked by men in power suits, acting as if she owned the place. Jason's jaw dropped. He recognized Danielle instantly, of course, but the context was all wrong. The woman he knew from heartfelt phone calls, the gentle artist, was now at the center of a corporate-style intervention. A piece of the puzzle clicked into his mind, the song being revoked, the official announcement, and now Danielle's reappearance. He felt a sickening lurch in his stomach as the unbelievable truth began to dawn on him. The guests were speechless. They were witnessing something far more compelling than a first dance. This was a hostile takeover. The ballroom was no longer a party. It had become a boardroom. And Lindsay, who had once mocked Danielle with such vicious confidence, was now standing exposed and powerless, a mere spectator at the public dismantling of her own wedding. She was completely at the mercy of the woman she had so brutally tried to destroy. Danielle stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the thick, tense silence. She didn't need a microphone. The room was so quiet that her words carried to every corner. She wasn't addressing the crowd. Her eyes were fixed on Lindsay and Jason, who were still standing frozen on the dance floor. "My name is Danielle Brooks," she began, her voice even and steady. "An hour ago I was told that I don't belong here." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, a direct echo of Lindsay's earlier cruelty. A wave of uncomfortable recognition rippled through the guests. "The song you are about to dance to," she continued, "is called The Harbor. I know it well. I wrote it." A collective, audible gasp swept across the ballroom. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. The whispers exploded into a roar of disbelief. "She wrote it? The singer? No way." Jason stared at Danielle, his mind reeling. He knew she had written the song, of course, but to hear her declare it so publicly, in this context, was staggering. The full weight of his inaction, of his silence, came crashing down on him. He had allowed his wife to humiliate the very artist whose work had been the bedrock of their love story. Lindsay's face was a mess of confusion and denial. You're lying," she sputtered, her voice a weak, trembling shadow of its former commanding tone. "You can't. That's a famous song." Danielle gave a small, sad smile. "Yes, it is," she said simply. "I wrote this song in a small apartment in Nashville 6 years ago. Every lyric, every note, every chord. It is my intellectual property. It is, in fact, my property." Kenji, her lawyer, stepped forward and placed a stack of papers on the table with a crisp, final slap. "This is the United States copyright registration for the composition The Harbor, filed by and registered to Danielle Brooks," he announced in a booming, legalistic voice. "And this," he added, tapping the screen of the tablet held by the label head, "is the documentation proving Ms. Brooks's 100% ownership of the master recording rights through her own label, Harbor Records. The evidence was irrefutable, laid out for all to see. The fantasy world Lindsay had built for herself, a world where she was the ultimate authority, had just collided with cold, hard, legal reality." Danielle's eyes, which had remained calm and composed throughout, now held a glint of steel. She looked directly at Lindsay, her voice dropping slightly, making it more personal, more pointed. "I came here tonight as a gift to a friend," she said, her gaze flicking for a moment to Jason. "I was going to give you this song, freely and with joy. But you made it very clear that my presence, my gift, was not welcome here. You don't get to humiliate a person and then dance to their music. You don't get to treat someone like they don't belong and then use their heart and soul as the soundtrack for your celebration." She delivered the final devastating blow. "And so tonight, you lost the right to use it. The license is revoked. The gift is taken back. There will be no first dance to my song." Lindsay's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed facade of arrogance and entitlement had crumbled, leaving behind only a pale, horrified woman standing in a spotlight she no longer controlled. She wasn't a queen. She was a fraud, exposed in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. Danielle hadn't shouted. She hadn't screamed or caused a scene. She didn't need to. Her identity, her quiet, undeniable truth, was louder and more powerful than any insult Lindsay could ever have imagined. The ballroom erupted. The carefully maintained dam of social etiquette broke, and a flood of chaotic energy poured through the room. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were loud, excited exclamations of shock and disbelief. "She's Danielle Brooks? The Danielle Brooks?" A man at a front table said to his wife, his eyes wide. "The one who wrote all those hits for Celeste Stone?" "Oh my God," his wife replied, her hand covering her mouth. Lindsay screamed at a millionaire. I need to sit down Lindsay's bridesmaids, who had been her loyal chorus of supporters just an hour before, now took a collective step back from her. Their faces were painted with embarrassment and a dawning sense of social horror. They were distancing themselves from the sinking ship, their loyalty as shallow as their laughter had been. Jason finally unfroze. The shame and humiliation that had been building inside him boiled over into a white-hot fury, directed not at Danielle, but at his wife. He strode off the dance floor, his face a thunderous mask. He grabbed Lindsay's arm, his grip tight. "What did you do?" he seethed, his voice low and shaking with rage. "What have you done?" That was Danielle, my friend, the woman I told you about. You mocked the very woman who gave us our song. You mocked the person who helped me heal. Lindsay flinched, trying to pull her arm away. "I didn't know," she cried, her voice high and panicked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. "How was I supposed to know? She didn't look like—" She trailed off, realizing too late how damning her words were. "Didn't look like what, Lindsay?" Jason shot back, his voice rising. "Didn't look rich enough for you? Didn't look white enough for you?" It was at that precise moment that Emily, the waitress, made her move. She had been watching from the sidelines, her heart pounding. Now was the time. She walked calmly over to a group of guests who were clustered near the head table, their own phones already out and recording the confrontation between the bride and groom. "You should see what happened earlier," Emily said, her voice clear and steady. She held up her phone, the screen glowing. She pressed play. The short video clip was damning. Lindsay's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the air again from the small phone speaker. "You don't belong here. Get out." The sneer on her face, the pure, undiluted contempt. It was all there, preserved in perfect, sickening detail. The guests gasped, leaning in to get a better look. The sight of the video of her own ugly behavior played back for her was the final straw. Lindsay let out a choked sob. The public destruction was complete. She was exposed not just as a snob, but as a prejudiced bully. Danielle watched the scene unfold for a moment longer. She saw the consequences of Lindsay's actions landing with the force of a physical blow. Her work was done. She walked over to Emily, who was now being surrounded by guests asking to see the video again. Danielle gently touched the young waitress's arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of genuine gratitude. "You were brave." Emily looked up at her, her eyes shining. "She was wrong," Emily said simply. "I just wanted someone to have proof." Danielle smiled, a real warm smile this time. "You did the right thing." She gave Emily's hand a gentle squeeze, a silent promise of future support, and then turned to leave. With her team flanking her, she walked back towards the ballroom doors, her head held high. She had walked in as an anonymous singer, and was walking out as a legend, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding that had been destroyed not by her, but by the bride's own hateful heart. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The wedding didn't just end, it imploded. As Danielle and her team departed, a mass exodus began. Guests, no longer pretending to celebrate, started grabbing their coats and heading for the doors, their phones buzzing with the texts and social media posts that were already flying into the digital ether. The story was too juicy, too shocking to contain. A bride humiliating a secret millionaire songwriter? It was the kind of drama that goes viral in minutes. Jason and Lindsay were left standing in the middle of a half-empty ballroom, the beautiful decorations now looking like a sad, expensive mockery. The argument between them was over. There was nothing left to say. The trust, the love, the very foundation of their brand-new marriage had been pulverized. Jason looked at the woman he had married just hours earlier and saw a complete stranger, a person whose values were a toxic sludge of prejudice and vanity. The wedding wasn't just tainted, it was dead on arrival. Within hours, Lindsay's reputation was in shambles. The video Emily had taken, combined with dozens of other clips from guests, was all over the internet. # wedding fail and # Lindsay. The bully were trending. Her perfect curated image was replaced with the ugly reality of her sneering face, her words of hate replayed for millions to see and condemn. The social circle she prized so highly turned on her, embarrassed to be associated with such a public and vulgar display of prejudice. Danielle, meanwhile, returned to her world. She didn't post about the incident. She didn't give interviews. She didn't fan the flames of Lindsay's public shaming. She had made her point, not with anger, but with quiet, decisive action. She had protected her dignity and her art. Throughout the entire ordeal, from the moment she was insulted to the moment she walked away, she had never once raised her voice. Her power was in her stillness, her control, her unwavering sense of self-worth. A few days later, a small but significant notice appeared in a local paper. Emily Torres, a waitress at the luxury hotel, had been publicly thanked by Harbor Records for her integrity and courage. The notice also mentioned that she had been awarded a full scholarship, funded by an anonymous benefactor, to the city's top music production program. A quiet act of justice, a reward for doing the right thing when no one was watching. The moral of the story became clear to everyone who heard it. Arrogance built on a foundation of prejudice is a house of cards. It may look impressive for a moment, but it cannot withstand the gentle, persistent force of the truth. Lindsay had tried to shout her way to dominance, believing her status and wealth made her invincible. But she had picked a fight with a woman whose power was real, deep, and undeniable. And in the end, that quiet, steady power had brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. The story didn't end in the ruins of the ballroom. Life, for all involved, moved on, irrevocably changed. A week after the wedding that wasn't, Jason Miller sat in a lawyer's office, the scent of old books and fresh coffee filling the air. He signed the last of the annulment papers with a steady hand. There was no sadness, only a profound sense of relief, of a narrow escape. He had been enchanted by Lindsay's polished surface, but the wedding had revealed the ugly truth of what lay beneath. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he was correcting it. He sent one last email to Danielle, not asking for forgiveness, but simply thanking her for everything. For the song, for the friendship, and for, in a strange way, showing him the truth before it was too late. He never got a reply, and he didn't expect one. He understood that chapter of his life was closed. A few months later, Danielle Brooks did something she rarely did. She stepped onto a stage in front of a live audience. It wasn't a stadium tour or a high-profile awards show. It was a charity concert for at-risk youth. The event was live-streamed, and millions of people tuned in, drawn by the recent viral story. She sat alone at a grand piano, the stage bare except for a single spotlight. "This is a song about finding a safe place to land," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying to every person in the hall and every viewer at home. "I want to dedicate it tonight, to all who have been told they don't belong." She began to play the opening chords of The Harbor. A hush fell over the audience. She sang it not with anger or bitterness, but with a deep, soulful grace that was more powerful than any accusation. The performance was a reclamation. She was taking her song back, cleansing it of the ugliness of the wedding, and rededicating it to its original purpose, to be a source of hope and healing. The performance went viral, even more so than the wedding disaster, inspiring millions with its message of resilience and dignity. And in a small, state-of-the-art recording booth across town, Emily Torres adjusted her headphones. She sat before a complex mixing board, her expression one of intense focus and deep joy. After the story broke, Danielle had reached out to her personally. She had seen not just a brave young woman, but someone with a keen ear and a passion for music. Danielle became her mentor, guiding her, teaching her, and opening doors she had never dreamed possible. Emily was no longer a waitress. She was a producer in training, her future bright and full of promise, a testament to the fact that one small act of courage can change a life forever. Injustice may shout the loudest at first. Its voice is often shrill, arrogant, and full of fury. It demands to be the center of attention. But truth is different. Truth is calm, steady, and unshakable. It doesn't always need to scream. It can wait patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it does, it always, always has the last word. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.